journalists, because we are like ambassadors of the truth, they view the world as like that all people are rational actors, that we are logical, that your readers are people who will look at all sides of the argument and be able to arrive at an objective truth or objective reality, which is what the role of a journalist is supposed to do.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave.
Hey, Kristie, really excited to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of your newsroom at DealStreetAsia. And obviously, I've seen you at many of the same conferences, I think the same panel, or different panels, and so forth. Time for the newsmaker to be interviewed.
Yes, which is, doesn't happen very often. I'm usually like over there where you are. It's very rare for interview. I do get a bit nervous sometimes, but I think this time is okay.
I can imagine someone's, yes, finally, she gets a revenge. She put me in something tough for. Then Jeremy's just going to really, I don't know.
Rip her apart.
Rip her apart with these softball questions. So it's the hardest question here, Kristie, is tell me about yourself. Who are you?
Okay, so my name is Kristie. I'm a venture capital and startup reporter and journalist. I've been in the media industry for about 14 years. I started off at CNA, Channel News Asia, so the Singaporeans will know it to be like the main broadcaster in Singapore. Started off in documentaries, moved on to business news. But I think I was probably more well known for my time at DealStreetAsia, which is also the longest stint I was in my media career, where I spent nearly 6 years doing venture capital and startup. And during those 6 years, it was actually one of the most rewarding times that I've ever had. I just left last year and basically moved to Dubai, which is where I'm based out of now. And came back to Singapore for a short break to join your podcast.
Very kind of you. And what's interesting is that you were at National University of Singapore. Obviously, so many startup founders and tech people came out of NUS. But did you know you were going to be a journalist, or what were you thinking?
It's funny you mentioned that, because actually back then, when I was studying in NUS, I don't think many people even had the idea of doing a startup. The idea of a startup wasn't even in front of most of my colleagues, even those that I knew who went to engineering. It wasn't really, culturally, it wasn't something that people aspired to do. I think that only came about maybe a couple of years after I graduated, I would say, when people started to pay attention to Grab and Gojek. They were like the up-and-coming company. And then the rise of some of these UTD universities, the newer universities that kind of pushed a more kind of hybrid education curriculum, where, the idea of doing something new and innovative and building something from scratch became something that was a bit more aspirational for students. But I came from the arts and social science faculty, so I studied political science. Didn't actually want to be a journalist. I stumbled into the profession because being Singaporean and growing up in this kind of environment where you don't really have the media outlets that we grew up on were maybe mainstream broadcasters, state broadcasters. So I guess there was always a certain level of cynicism around. Graduated from school, sent my application to because I didn't know what I was going to do. Got a response and got the job. So turned out to be actually also really fun. I think it was a really good training ground, I would say, because being the main broadcaster in Singapore, you have really wide exposure to lots of different types of stories and really good talent in the TV station. But it was really fun. I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah, I think it's been fantastic to see. Actually, even these state broadcasters actually bring up or level up their game over time as well. Like going through that experience, obviously you took the job, but what did you like about the experience at Channel News Asia? What did you learn?
I think one thing that I took away from the whole experience, so I was there for nearly 4 years, and it's something that I still carry with me today. We used to have this tagline in CNA called Telling the Asian Perspective. I don't know if you recall that. I don't hear it so much anymore, but it's something that we used to have that motto for quite a long time. And it's something that really resonated with me. It still continues to resonate with me because in CNA, we had correspondents across all of the major APAC cities. And I think a lot of what made us stand out vis-a-vis all of the other TV broadcasters was that we were telling the Asian narrative from Asia through Asia lens, which I felt we were occupying a gap in the market that no one else was able to occupy. Of course, you have Nikkei and HK, which I think they're also doing a fabulous job at what they do. I think all of us have our part in being able to tell those types of stories. There's just a handful of us in Asia that were really, really out there telling those stories. And I think it's something that I still believe in even now. I remember when I was looking for a job, before I joined DSA, there was something that I actually was very intentional as well in telling myself, okay, what do I want to look in my next job? I knew I wanted to be in Singapore. I knew I wanted to do finance. I knew I wanted to be in publication. And it's something that I think more journalists, more producers, more storytellers, more documentarists really telling our story. Because I think Asia has so much to give to the world. But if we don't tell them, then we can't be letting anyone else tell a story. We have to tell the
BBC.
story.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Have you heard of the world's stinkiest fruit? You know, the durian. You know. Yeah, no, I totally get it.
And I think CNA has come a really long way. And of course, they still get a certain amount of criticism from time to time, especially when it comes to Singapore politics. Those types of topics tend to be a little bit, how do you say, controlled. A lot of people tend to ask me, oh, is there censorship in CNA? I'm like, yeah, there is censorship on certain types of topics that tend to be politically sensitive to the government, which is full government. But by and large, like I mentioned, the fact that you don't have media outlets be able to occupy this kind of narrative to me still means that there's a special place in the market for it.
Yeah.
And that's something they have honed really well and they've done really well. But yeah, when I joined CNA, because my background was in political science, I very quickly realized like, oh crap, I can't be writing political stuff. And actually that was how I moved into business reporting and learned about business. So actually I have no like finance or business background, which I think surprises a lot of people because along the way, especially when I was in DSA, you really have to troll through a lot of financial reports and you're going to learn accounting. So a lot of it actually was stuff that I learned on my own. Of course, you had editors to guide you, but it was, yeah, a lot of it was just like on the job kind of training and just fell in love with like finance and business. And I realized, wow, like money really touches every aspect of our life. But also I think more importantly, the essence of like power, like with money comes power as well. And politics is the study of power. And I realized, wow, it's all interlinked. And yeah, I fell in love with it. I just never left.
And tell me about your journey because you started from China, Southeast Asia, and you went through. But could you provide a quick outline of how you eventually got to this?
Okay, so after CNA, I spent about 4 years there, and then I moved to a content agency called We Are Social. So I was actually a content strategist there for about 2.5 years. It was actually the longest 2.5 years of my life, I would say. But why I moved there also was because when I was at CNA, I realized, oh crap, like TV is dying, you know. Viewership numbers are going down. And that was really the time when social media platforms, Facebook and all these social media, Twitter back then, was gaining a lot of ground. And there was a huge push towards more kind of digital storytelling, which I felt that the main broadcasters were not able to recapture. So I was like, okay, I need to put myself in an environment that was exploring stories from a more kind of digital lens. So when I joined We Are Social, it was quite different from, it wasn't editorial, it wasn't news, but it was actually more like digital advertising. So we would be producing stories on digital and social media, creating strategies for them for brands. So some of the brands that I used to work with was like Intel, about 20th Century Fox. And it was also very interesting because it was around the time when I joined We Are Social that the Cambridge Analytica insightful because I came from a media background and then moved into advertising, which to a lot of people was like, oh, you're crossing over to the dark side. And then this Cambridge Analytica thing blew up, which created such an uproar and all the journalists were almost offended by what was happening, the fact that Trump was taking advantage of the metrics and all of that, which is funny because when I moved into We Are Social, you really get an inside peek of how brands basically they've been manipulating buying ads for their brands, for their products for years and years. This is a strategy that has been done a really long time, but it almost seemed as if the media people didn't know that something like that. And so the way that it blew up, obviously it involved leadership of the country, but it was interesting to see it from a media person moving into the ad agency side and seeing it from that lens and realizing, wow, this is a different world. If we fast forward from there till now, I think the media landscape has just, we've seen media outlets just continuously become outpaced by technology, by social media, by hits and headlines, and this polarization of views and censorship versus non-censorship gone to a very different era now.
And you were seeing all that happen, and you still chose to be part of DealStreetAsia when it was a very young team. So how did you get yourself to the point of, hey, this is a good idea for me to do?
Yeah, so after we moved to CNBC for a short bit, realized I wasn't really seeing a lot of focus on Asian storytelling, which is what I mentioned before. That was actually one of the reasons why I left. And then joined DealStreetAsia. I just needed a job. It really was the truth. But like I mentioned, I had 3 bullet points I wanted to check off. And DSA was the only one that checked all 3. I didn't want to go back to CNA. I know I could, but I didn't want to. I wanted a new experience. And yeah, Georgie just really quickly took me in, and there was a vacancy for a Singapore reporter. And I joined and got it, and I guess the rest is kind of...
So how big was the team when you joined?
Like to 50.
Yeah, so there's a really a lot of ground in terms of coverage.
Yeah, it was a really small team, small now. Even today, I think there are just about 30 people, which for a lot of people, it comes as a bit of a surprise because of the impact that we have on our geographies. But yeah, it still remains a really small team. But when I joined, actually, in startups, you have the 0 to 1 and then the 1 to 10. So I would say I joined at the 1 to 10 kind of period. So DSA had already been around for a couple of years. But when I joined, it was actually right around the time when Nikkei acquired us. So I was there just right before the acquisition and then after. So of course, when the Nikkei acquisition came about, obviously there was a bit of support, branding, funding. We were able to accelerate on a lot of things. When I joined, it was also the time where we just applied the paywall. I believe I am the first reporter to start reporting on ACRA, which, for those who don't know, is actually the kind of private company database for Singapore companies. And back then, none of the journalists were paying attention to it. It's funny that now it's becoming a bit of a big thing. They're talking now in the media, right? Oh, the IC numbers are available at ACRA. When I got into ACRA, I remember feeling, oh, wow, his IC number is this. This is where he lives. It's quite surprising. A lot of information is actually very readily available if you just pay a small fee. But I used to take into those filings, and I don't know if you've used ACRA before. UX is terrible. But eventually, when we started using that as a resource for us to build on some of our investigative reporting, that eventually turned into a whole revenue stream for us. Fast forward a few years today, that's Data Vantage. So Data Vantage is basically a software where you can go in and get access to most of the company data, not just in Singapore, but in Southeast Asia, because most of the Southeast Asian companies are also domiciled here. And on top of that, we are able to generate reports and insights on sectors and all of that stuff. So yeah, it was really rewarding to be part of that whole growth, the 1 to 10, as I mentioned, where just one small action and a series of repeated actions could eventually lead to something much bigger. And yeah, I would say 2 things were unique about DSA. One was the ability to do investigative reporting, having the kind of support to do the kind of investigative reporting. But 2 is, as I alluded to, was being able to be newsroom startup. Most of the newsrooms today are really large newsrooms. And a lot of journalists can hide behind a brand, where if you say you come from XYZ company, everyone knows about it. You get invited to all the media launches. When I first joined DSA, some of them knew about us, but we would still be left out of a lot of media releases, media events. Every time they didn't invite us to any of these Google reports, you were like, really? Or some investor or some company didn't invite us. And why did you invite BT? Why did you invite Bluebird? You got to invite us. It took us a really long time to build that credibility. So it's like a startup in that sense. When you're ground zero, like nobody knows about you. As you keep persistently getting out there, putting your name out there, eventually people come to know, okay, these people are serious. And then today, you don't even have to think about it. People will immediately want us to be part of their launch or want us to cover certain things. So I think we've come a really long way. And I think it's very rewarding to be able to build all of that, grow the company that way in terms of building the brand.
So what do you think is the impact of DealStreetAsia?
Trick question.
Well, the way you said the impact, because,
Okay,
how do
so-
people receive DealStreetAsia?
Actually asking you that. People,
I've definitely heard of people complaining about DealStreetAsia.
yeah, they complain because we can be pretty aggressive, I would say. And especially during the years that was 2018 to 2024, we were doing a lot of investigative work as well. Yeah, I would say we were quite persistent. We didn't take no for an answer. And yeah, I guess we're willing to write about things that maybe a lot of investors or people in the ecosystem were not so happy to see published. Yeah, I guess that's what we are really known for. But you can tell me because you were on the other end.
I'm happy to be that counterpart foil for you. I think what's interesting is that, like you said, you were breaking news. The most obvious one would be analysis of current affairs. You were also breaking news early, so maybe a fund announcement, but before the official press release and everything, because people used to take 1 month to announce stuff, and you would announce stuff 1 or 2 days after it came out. So people got irritated by you because people have a media strategy, but then you break the news because of the ACRA filing, which is a fund formation or an announcement or fundraise, and then also you did investigative journalism about fraud or allegations or disputes, which obviously is embarrassing for the founders involved, is embarrassing for the startup investors or board involved. Obviously, the state broadcasters are not covering the tech beat, so there's not much visibility. I think Tech in Asia was a little bit more focused on what their bread and butter was, but less on the investigative journalism. And
I think they have done their share of investigative journalism too.
Octopan, the kind of like the
credentials, right? Yeah, and I think it's great. They're doing a lot of that too.
I think they've definitely done a lot now. Today they're doing a lot. I'm just saying that I think DealStreetAsia felt as a consumer first with that kind of angle, and everyone's like forwarding it to each other and clicking on it because paywall.
Yeah, and I get really frustrated.
WhatsApp groups like, does someone have a DealStreet?
They'll call me and be like, Kristie, we need the story, but it's behind the paywall. I know you're gonna buy it first. That happened a lot,
I mean, so the interesting part of that dimension was that people wanted to read that stuff because of investigative journalism, but nobody wanted to be the subject of that investigative journalism. So what was that experience like? Because you're the editor, obviously you must be getting like pressure or pushback or feedback from the market.
Yeah, actually, Georgie got a lot more heat than me. Of course, I would get my own heat because as a reporter, you're like on the front line.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is really kudos to Georgie's vision, right? I didn't really do that much investigative reporting prior to DSA. And if you actually look at Georgie is my founder of DealStreetAsia. He's very well known in India. He was from ET, and the Indian landscape clearly is very different from Singapore, where in Singapore you can fall online. So he's handled these kinds of stories before. He understands the complexity. The important thing is really like nuance, especially when you start doing more difficult stories. And I guess especially for me, like the learning also is the more stories that you do and the more complicated it becomes, the more nuance you really need to be. And I think that's something that I when I read, I would love to hear your thoughts about this as well. Most of the reporting today in mainstream media, it really lacks a lot of nuance. We really need nuance to really understand a subject matter really well. And when it comes to something that is very scandalous or involvement of corruption, misreporting and all that, you really need to explore every single angle, every single little cranny and hole to ensure that you try to put forth the most objective story that you can produce in a way that is also empathetic to all sides. I would never say, and the truth of a lot of these stories is that it's never just like one winner and one loser. One was right and the other was wrong. It's never that's not true for anything in life. And in storytelling, you have to be able to piece all of that together instead of just painting everything in one broad brush and say, this guy. In most cases, it usually involves a whole host of people. It's not just one person. But unfortunately, sometimes in our media landscape today, it's very to pin the blame on one character or one personality or one profile because he has these characteristics. You have all these specific personalities, especially in the VC startup landscape, right? And I think we approaching it from that kind of lens and with a certain level of empathy is something that takes a lot of practice. In fact, I feel like my admiration for people in the VC startup ecosystem has only grown more and more as I do a lot more of these stories because people don't realize the amount of risk, difficulty, and challenges. It's also a very lonely journey for a lot of these. And when things go to shit, you do not want to be seen. Some of these stories that have gone out of like founders who, unfortunately maybe didn't make the right moves and the right decisions. And if story goes out, you're going to find a job. You're going to leave the country. It's terrible. It's really awful. I don't know how they're going to find a way back again, right? And yet you still want these stories, these failures to happen because all the time, it's just not reality. Yeah.
And what's interesting is that what does that look from day to day? What does an investigative journalist do? Like you wake up in the morning and you're like, put on your spy glasses and you're looking through the window.
No, that's not how it works. Actually, I just spend a lot of time talking to people.
Yeah.
I spend majority of my time just talking to people and reading. That's it. Especially when you're working in subscription media, you really need to deliver stories that are of value to your users because they are paying for your stories. You really need to spend time with people in the industry. The only way that you can produce something that's valuable is if you know exactly what concerns them, what are they worried about, what are they following, what are they intrigued by, all these things. So understanding like your reader audience really well, that's actually where I get all my stories from. And in that sense, I think in business, I guess there's some similarity to that, right? You got to understand what is it that your customer really wants. And that's actually how I approach my stories as well, by really understanding what people are following. So it's not because I'm like brilliant or smart, whatever. No, actually, all of this stuff came from you guys, So, and to be able to give back to them is also very rewarding. At least it was for me.
What are some myths or misconceptions about being an investigative journalist?
What are misconceptions?
You're an evil person who
I'm an evil person.
delights in... You're a scary person because anything you talk to her will be quoted and make it ever be another one.
I think that happens. People tend to be like a bit afraid to speak to me now. I guess it depends. It really depends. Like being able to foster a much closer relationship. They know and they can trust that I'm not going to be quoting something out of context. It's only when you quote out of context or you said in a different way. And obviously, if I interview you and then that happened to you, like, this girl doesn't understand what she's doing. That's usually how it happens, right? So, like I said, I think it's really important to build that relationship. Of course, if the person has never interacted with me before, usually that happens for like the first one or two chats. Then usually the person will be like, "Oh, record." Which is okay. I expect that, and it's fine. It's totally fine. But I definitely shouldn't be like shoving the microphone to everybody's face. But it's not really, at least on my style. I know there are some journalists who do that. I don't.
Yeah, I guess that makes all the sense. I guess the misconception of investigative journalism be like someone who's like putting the ear next against the wall to listen what's going on.
Listening to everything.
Yeah.
Like Big Brother.
I mean, you're using ACRA before everybody else was. You are digging through like the file.
I mean, if you're doing investigative, well, you're going to dig somewhere. Like,
There's a lot of evolution.
There's a lot. Yeah, it's a shocking amount.
There's a shocking amount. That's the thing. Like, which is quite different from the US system.
Yeah. In most countries, I think only in Singapore, as far as I know, that is something that's that transparent. But it definitely gave me an insight into, so this is how the cap table could look like.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, so this person owns this much. this father co-invested with the son in this thing. So you start to connect the dots that
Yeah,
way,
exactly.
which is fun. Investors do a little bit of it too.
Yeah, you do the legwork for us. And then it's not our math, it's your math. But yeah, I think recently did the piece on e-fishery, the Series D.
I didn't do it.
And then there was like some calculations about how much they exited for and a rough estimate of how much the ROI was on that exit. So yeah, it's been interesting to see. I think also the sophistication level go up for these articles as well. So I guess when you look ahead, what do you think is the future for investigative journalism?
Wow. Maybe not investigative, maybe just like journalism as a whole. I think the media landscape is going through a really rough time now, especially in the last 1-2 years. If you've been following the news, like a lot of media outlets there's been more attrition of media outlets than there have media outlets getting created, which is really sad and dangerous if you think about it, right? Especially now when you have a lot of these like big tech giants going more and more prominent in some parts of the world. Like tech guys are collaborating with government as well, which makes you wonder. And then of course, with kind of the prevalence of social media and the intrusiveness even of social media in our day-to-day lives and the way that it informs the way that we view the world, makes me wonder, I don't know how society is going to really evolve in the coming years, because if you don't have a certain level of like independent, mainstream ideas being able to kind of, historically when I was growing up, it saw the world in one way. And then now it's just, I guess the good side of it is that today we have a lot more access to different types of information. But unfortunately, I don't think everybody's able to take in all of that information and be able to digest it and be able to arrive at a very cogent conclusion of, okay, this is what I think about this. I have no time. And I remember actually one of the biggest insights when I was at We Are Social and before I moved back into media was that I realized that the biggest insight in when you're working in advertising and media, they're two kind of very diametric opposites. They're called advertising or PR in the dark side and editorial in the light.
Sounds good versus evil.
Oh yeah, this is very common. Like we talk about it all the time. But I realized that the both sides actually see the world in two very different ways. Journalists, because we are like ambassadors of the truth, they view the world as like that all people are rational actors, that we are logical, that your readers are people who will look at all sides of that argument and be able to arrive at an objective truth or objective reality, which is what the role of a journalist is supposed to do. But in advertising, that truth is not an objective truth. It looks at people as people have biases, people have prejudices, people motivated by their past, by their behavior, by their background, where they grew up in, what kind of social economic background did they grow up in. And that informs the kinds of stories that are highly compelling to their audience. So it's a very different kind of way of approaching storytelling. And if you look at the way that social media today, why is it that certain stories have become more viral than others? I remember one of the things in your social as well, I can't remember who it was, but he was sharing about how if you look at the data, if you just look purely at metrics, like social media metrics, what are the kinds of stories that are the most viral? Porn, cat, babies.
Cats and babies.
That says a lot. If we do a really good objective story, you're going to get lots of likes. I'm like, yeah, but this is what you're competing against, right? Which is why I think the media, I mean, kind of one full circle now, I think the media business model is really broken. And it's very hard to fix because ultimately it's a race to the bottom. And I don't have any solutions, right? If I did, I'm pretty sure some engineers would have come up with something already. But the fact that we're seeing declining readership, subscriptions, and then eventual attrition of all these media outlets just goes to show that are not willing to pay for quality content. And yet at the same time, the amount of work that goes into the kind of investigative reporting that we used to do at DSA is tremendous. So it's like hours and hours. I've worked for stories for like months, and some of the stories are still not out yet. They're still in my folder. And it takes a really long time, a lot of investment. But once the story is out, it's out. And people move on to the next things, which is what I call the race to the bottom. Yeah, until I think in the US, like people are still they're more willing to pay for subscription contents. But in Asia particularly, I don't think people are that willing to pay for it. But I don't know do you subscribe to Medium, or like what you think about the media landscape these days as a consumer?
Yeah, I think 5 years ago I wasn't consuming short form videos, and today I am. For example, I'm waiting for a meeting that's been delayed. I pull up my phone and then suddenly there's a bunch of shorts, and I'm like, yeah, I'll watch shorts. I used to listen to more audiobooks, and then it became podcasts, then now it's video podcasts, and then I think YouTube. Well, I used to watch a lot of it. I stopped watching a bit of it. Now it's come back. I think there's a lot of different dynamics. But then, of course, I'm working very hard. Like, okay, I need to read my long form book. Yeah, so after the holiday, I read 3 books. So it was just good to get back to reading. But yeah, I think it's a very difficult push. And the fact that I'm swimming hard against that push, this goes to show how much everybody else is following that current. Switching chapters here, could you share about a time that you have been brave?
When I've been brave, I guess maybe the story that I did for Revolution Pre-Crafted was, I would say it was quite a big story that we did. And I would consider it to be probably the biggest story that I did when I was at DSA. What was then the Philippines' first tech unicorn, also backed to by VCs. So Unicorn is a company that's valued above $1 billion. It was a big deal at the time because it was the first from the Philippines. Everyone, I guess in the Southeast Asian ecosystem, you would treat the unicorn as a milestone, something that you want to reach, right? It's indicative of where the ecosystem was. It was founded by this very kind of charismatic, slightly wacky founder. I don't know if you've met him before. Robbie Antonio, who was also the son of a prop tycoon in the Philippines. So he actually came from a rich family. The story was basically how we realized that it wasn't a unicorn. So it involved me flying to Manila. Revolution Pre-Crafted is what the business was that they prefabric housing for the luxury segment. They did some properties in Manila, but they also did properties like overseas. And I guess the differentiating factor also is that Robbie Antonio was very close terms with a lot of these like celebrity architects overseas, like Zaha Hadid and all these people. And he would take their designs and then produce these properties like prefab at a low cost, so-called. So yeah, the story basically involved us we realized that the company was not a unicorn. So yeah, as I mentioned, it involved me flying to Manila, took pictures of some of the sites where the development areas are meant to be and they never delivered. It became quite a national story, I think just because it was the Philippines' first unicorn. And yeah, eventually led to a national investigation by the government on the company. Yeah, that was fun.
So what was it like? Because obviously you're doing the research and I can see the work as in you're doing that work. When you hit publish, before you hit publish, do you like get scared or anxious? Like, did you get facts wrong?
Oh my gosh, yeah. It took us a few months, I think. But the story really came together when I made the trip to Manila. And I remember when I was there, I spent a few days there and I didn't tell anyone that I was going because I didn't want anyone to know. Only my family and the company knew that I was going. And I remember, as any work trip, you want to arrange meetings on the side. The moment I touched down, I had one meeting with one of the Filipino founders. I wouldn't name who he was, but I told him, hey, I'm working on this story on Revolution. And he was like, Kristie, do you know that the highest mortality rate for journalists after Afghanistan is the Philippines? Philippines is number 2. I literally just landed. I was just like 2 hours landing. And I'm like, now this guy is telling me that I could be dead. And then finally, I managed to get some sources who were able to share some intel. Honestly, I think sometimes, like especially Hollywood, they tend to glamorize the journalist profession.
Yeah, civil war, kind of like
the journalist is out there doing this investigative
wearing
report.
A bulletproof jacket, the camera.
The people who are the bravest, the journalists are not the bravest people. The bravest people are actually the people that we speak to. It's actually the sources that I spoke to. Because these people, if they found out that they were talking to me, be in such big shit. You have no idea. And these are people who are on the ground. I'm Singaporean. I can say goodbye, Manila. I come back to Singapore. No one's going to touch me. Everything will be okay. These people will probably be taken down by lawyers. Who knows? In the Philippines, people can just disappear. I know who these people are. Those are the real brave people. And I was really concerned about them. Yeah, I was really genuinely concerned about them. I came back and I was like, please God, because I knew that Robbie Antonio was very litigious, and I was warned that he was surrounded by an army of lawyers. If he gets angry, you just don't know, especially when you're dealing with characters where there's a lot at stake. And it's very public story.
$1 billion at stake, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess it was good eventually when the story went out. Obviously, the public was really angry about it because there were a lot of people who were deceived into buying these properties, and then they realized, oh crap, this guy has been taking all our money. And who knows where the money went? The money didn't go into building these houses, these villas that we wanted to save up for a retirement home. Some of them were actually doing that. And it got really public, so much so that, yeah, it became a bit of an embarrassment for him. Yeah, last I heard, he flew away to New York. I think he's still there now.
Yeah, makes sense. And so I think it's interesting because obviously when you break a story like that, obviously people are angry. There's a lot of, can imagine people say, this is true, this is incorrect, let's update the accuracy and inaccuracy. Like you said, people have homes that have not been built, so they're frustrated. How do you feel like that? Well, now you're looking back on it. Do you think it's like a movie? Do you think it's very painful? What's your reflection now that you're looking back on that? Yeah.
Back on, I realized there were so many other companies that are. But wait, this is just one company.
Tip of the iceberg.
Exactly.
Really?
He talked about eventually Zalingo came out, E-Fishery. I did a couple of stories on One Championship. I did a story on Spenmo, which is also quite a big one. And this is just a few companies. There are lots of them that I just never heard it. And escaped me. And you know how it is in VCs and startups, right? A lot of the startups in our region are in very highly informal sectors. Yeah. So it's actually really fudged the numbers or misreport the accounting. And I think in the last few years, especially after the correction, all these started coming out. So the true colors start coming out, which actually I think is a good thing. I realized it could be a lot more widespread than what we actually see on the surface. But I'm glad that we managed to contribute a little bit to that, I guess, pushing the ecosystem toward a lot more integrity. And it's important that certain people be held accountable for their actions, because ultimately we want what's best for the ecosystem. Yeah. And the only way you can have a healthy ecosystem is that some of these stories be told. So I know I sound so idealistic, but
it's not political science undergraduate itself just came up and it's truth to power.
Terrible, but it's not.
On that note, let's wrap things up. So those are 3 things that I learned from you. First of all, thanks so much for sharing about your early journey, about how you accidentally fell into kind of journalism and that early journey in terms of discovering whether you liked journalism and what you learned about it along the way. Secondly, thanks for sharing about your time at DealStreetAsia, talking about what's it like to have a paywall and share subscription with folks in order to be able to break stories that people may or may not want to be out there. But it's fascinating to hear that ground level view about what's it like to be in that newsroom writing these articles. And lastly, thanks so much for sharing about your own personal experience of being an investigative journalist. That was just fascinating to hear about what's it like to be searching for the truth and trying to say, this is true, this is not true, this is the nuance, this is the founder's perspective, this is the board's perspective, this is the customer's perspective. So really fascinating to hear of that. So thank you so much for sharing your journey.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.